I'm Paulo Oliveira. I'm head of payment solutions and open banking at Fcamera. There is a technology company that is participating on the implementation of open banking in Brazil, and is also offering solutions for the financial institutions to accelerate the process to implement open banking. Today, I'm going to talk to Bragg. He's CTO and founder of Radium. There is a UK company responsible for the implementation of the open banking directory in UK and now in Brazil also. Half is an expert in security, the author UK's open banking security profile, and also a quoted author of open banking, OpenID financial grade API protocol. Hi, Half. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before you start, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said, Ralph Bragg, CTO of Radium. I've been involved in open banking now for quite a long time. I am an Australian and I am living in the United Kingdom, and I'm greatly enjoying partaking in the delivery of open banking in Brazil. Looking forward to seeing what happens over the next couple of years.
Great, nice. Okay, I'm gonna ask you some questions that we often receive here, okay? Well, the first one is, you participated in the implementation of open banking director in United Kingdom, and now are participating also in this implementation in Brazil. What are the differences related to the security standards in both of the countries?
That's a good question. So in the United Kingdom, when the UK started, the UK had to come up with a solution that was both secure enough, but also could be implemented in time. And that meant making some shortcuts and taking some tactical decisions in order to make sure that the ecosystem could be born whilst keeping a long-term eye on global interoperability and the alignment to global standards. So the UK's security position went through a few different iterations. Firstly, it was a solution that it ran and created and designed itself, which gave the banks a little bit more leeway and to do some non-secure type of operations, mainly to give them time to lean heavily on their vendors to get their vendors to catch up. As you can imagine, lots of different banks, lots of different security vendors, all with different products that adhere to different security standards. Over the course of the next couple of years, all of the vendors have managed to upgrade all of their software and align to what is now the gold standard of security for API or highly regulated data sharing, which is the OpenID Foundation financial grade API security profile. I know it's a mouthful. Everybody shortens it to the word FAPI just to make it easier to understand what we're talking about. Now, FAPI has recently become a final specification, which means we no longer are anticipating making any normative or substantial changes to that specification. And we are now seeing all banks globally align onto flavors or variants of the FAPI protocol. Now, that means that Brazil has a lot of the heavy lifting already done for it. It has a lot of support from a lot of vendors, and it should be far more straightforward to implement. Saying that, Brazil does have a couple of key differences. Brazil has a requirement in its legislation for the TPP, the client, to assert identity information to the bank, basically to say to the bank, I want you to authenticate Ralph, but only if you can confirm that it is Ralph. And that means that the TPP has to provide personal information to the bank over a potentially untrusted network. And that is going to require the banks in Brazil to adopt an even more strict and even more secure security posture than those that are being adopted in the UK. Now, this shouldn't cause banks much challenge. Most vendors should be able to support this particular extra security enhancement, but it is a change and it is something that will have to be impact assessed by various different banks, technology providers, to make sure that they can meet the most secure protocol being implemented globally, which is the Brazil flavor of the FAPI OpenID security protocol.
Oh, great. Speaking of more standards, security standards, Brazil, you're going to use also the CIBA. Why is the inclusion of CIBA such a massive step forward for Brazil compared to the other countries?
Yeah, so CIBA is probably the biggest leap forward for any standards body or any data sharing ecosystem globally. And the reason that CIBA is so powerful is it allows the non-digital customers of banks to be able to engage in the digital economy. For example, if you have an infirm parent or a young child, or you're dealing in codependent or elderly type support arrangements where different customers of the banks may not be able to interact with those minorities using digital means, CIBA, or client-initiated back-channel authentication, allows the bank to obtain authorization and authentication of those customers by any means necessary. That means that a bank could, on request from a TPP, send a letter in the post to someone saying, please sign this letter and we will give TPPs access to your data. Or they could do a phone call or an SMS or any other mechanism that is available to them to obtain the authorization from their customers to release data. And that means that you can bring the entire segment of the non-digital economy or the non-digital customer base into open banking. And that is an incredibly powerful capability for the Brazilian economy, especially considering the size of Brazil, the disparate locations of Brazil, and just the sheer number of people. 200 million plus is a very, very large customer base. So, and a sizable percentage, which means a sizable number of those people will be non-digital natives. This is a really good way to bridge the divide. CIBA also offers some really interesting use cases when it comes to payments. When you want to start doing things like pay with Alexa or pay with Siri or pay with a kiosk at a shop, there's a lot of new innovative payment type arrangements where a bank can push messages to a customer safely and then obtain authentication authorization. It's going to be really exciting to see what emerges from these two new standards.
Nice. So with CIBA, you can even ask Alexa or Google Home to give your TPP access to your data, right?
You need to connect it first. In the Alexa app, then TV video to get started.
And that's exactly what happens. She's always listening and she's always available, and she can always help make payments and perform other operations with your consent using a CIBA flow. Yes, it's going to be really interesting to be able to pay with your car or pay with your speakerphone or consent to an operation via either of those two mechanisms. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this space.
Nice. So lots of possibilities. You can have a personal assistant or even your car or asking for a payment, for example, and you can authorize this payment in your mobile phone, right?
That's correct.
Nice, very nice. So I see some people might be concerned about the security of open banking, especially people that doesn't know much about that. How secure is open banking, especially in Brazil?
So it's a great question. And people do have always a right to be wary and to pay close attention of where their data is being used and is being transferred. The security protocols that open banking is being built on is being done so is based on a security profile that has extensive formal analysis, significant peer reviewing of some really, really top-notch universities around the world that have looked at all of the different possible attacks, threats, risks associated with all of these different potential sources of compromise or attacks. And so far, the formal models show that there are no known vulnerabilities to a well-implemented FAPI solution. So that means that how a bank transmits your data with your consent from the bank to a third party is 100% safe, absolutely 100% safe. And we will be helping the ecosystem achieve that by implementing robust conformance and certification processes to make sure that everybody is following the rules and have read and understood the security obligations and standards correctly. So a lot of care and attention is being given to making sure that this ecosystem is as safe as can be. In terms of practices and processes for how data needs to be stored and maintained and looked after when it's not flowing around, that is probably the #1 location where regulators will have to pay close attention to the security requirements and obligations on third parties to make sure that your data is always safe. So banks do this naturally, and for TPPs, they will have to make sure that they have similar processes in to act as the custodians of your data, because as you share your data from a bank to a TPP, it's no longer the bank's responsibility if it gets lost at the TPP. And I think that's something that everyone in this ecosystem is going to have to slowly realize, that as you ask banks and TPPs to transmit and transfer data, you are empowering and entrusting those third parties with a lot of responsibility to look after your data. And you hope that everybody in the ecosystem does so with the same care and attention that your primary banking provider does.
And probably you need some work from especially from the banks, to educate their customers, to show to them how it's safe, that they can share the data without concerns. How it was done in the UK?
Yeah, in the UK it was done late. It was very much recognized now that that it is a very important thing for banks to be doing. It's a very important thing for the central authority and the regulator to be doing, is to educate people as to this brave new service that is coming along, and to help them understand that it is safe, that it is being well implemented, and it is there to really benefit consumers. So it's very much a responsibility of everyone to implement it correctly, and then help promote the possibilities and opportunities that these new mechanisms and these new services will enable. In the UK, there's recently been a big step forward where the government has now started to accept open banking payments. So that means 72 million people can now make their tax payments using an open banking payment, which is a big leap forward and a big sign of confidence in the whole open banking ecosystem, that this can now be done via to pay your tax bill.
Great. Okay, and we see that all these standards, security standards, some of them very new. What are the challenges for the financial institutions to implement all the security infrastructure for open banking?
So the security part of the infrastructure is relatively straightforward, mainly because there's a large number of vendors that now support the necessary standards. The biggest challenge is finding the appropriate partners and skilled partners that understand how to configure those vendors and configure those various technologies in order to make it function. For existing banks, the other challenges and the thing they need to recognize is that you will have most of the solution already. A lot of banks will already have an API gateway, but you may not have an authorization server. You may have an authorization server, but don't know how to do open banking consents or interact with the trust framework, or configure your products in the correct way. Banks shouldn't feel panicked in terms of having to throw out entire systems or all of their systems. And the biggest advice for banks would be to not try and invent this or implement this yourselves. Building security capability and security products is quite time consuming, it's quite costly, and requires a significant amount of skills, expertise, and ongoing support and maintenance. These standards are now ubiquitous. They are global, they are commodity, which means you have a lot of technical choice as to what vendors you use. This real skill is choosing the appropriate partners to help you implement them and making sure that your partners actually understand what is required of them.
Great. And if you would give some advice to the financial institutions, what are the main points that they should give more attention when implementing open banking?
The fundamental one is to recognize that this is not just a small regulatory program. Most open banking programs that in the UK that were treated as a small compliance exercise failed, or they were significantly late, or they finally recognized that this small little compliance program actually was much bigger, had much greater impact, and had was really the future for how banks need to engage with their customers and secure their services digitally. Every single bank in the UK and Australia and other jurisdictions that are on this journey are using this as an opportunity for strategic replatforming and strategic transformation. And it's a phenomenal opportunity for banks to really capitalize on a regulatory mandate, i.e. they have to do this in order to fix and improve a lot of the ways that they offer digital services today. So the number one advice for all banks that are involved in open banking is don't treat this as just a little tactical solution. Recognize that this is the start of a groundbreaking movement towards APIs, towards better digital communications, towards more secure digital communications, and treat this as the opportunity for the very large digital transformation at scale that it is. Those banks that went early and recognize the potential of open banking to completely transform how they engage with customers, but also how they deliver technology, are the ones that are now reaping the biggest benefits from security, agility, the ability to bring new products to market, and customer satisfaction. So that's by far the number one lesson.
Okay. So do you have any good example of some bank or some institution that invested on open banking and did something different or something
better? Good? Honestly, all of the banks in the UK are now significantly improved their digital offerings. They all have far better customer satisfaction ratings. They have far better digital engagement. They're all exploring the use of APIs and partnerships in different ways. And it is interesting to see which way different banks are going. Some are going APIs for business-to-business connections. Others are pursuing platform as a banking service. Others are using these as cost reduction programs. It's an API program helps providers and consumers in numerous different measures. And so far, I'm not going to call a winner, but there's a few of the major banks in the UK are really starting to show some fantastic promise, particularly when they're trying to compete with some of the more challenger and innovative providers on the market.
Did you see that in this movement for comply with open banking, some banks had to accelerate their digital transformation, especially banks that use old legacy systems?
Yeah, all of them had to accelerate their digital transformation programs one way or another. As I said earlier, some banks did a tactical solution and now are having to re-accelerate their digital transformation programs. And other banks use it as an opportunity to step on the gas and go faster with their strategic digital transformation programs. But every single one of them has recognized the potential and the promise of an API and modern channels architecture for offering services both internally and externally.
Nice. And do you see many opportunities for the fintechs to enter this open bank world and take advantage of that?
Yeah, limitless. So the message to fintechs is the way Brazil is designing its ecosystem is in a lot of the ways better than how it was done in the UK, because it's got a lot of the lessons learned. In the UK, you have a single standard, which means that you can connect to the entire UK market with a single library. You don't need to buy expensive middleware software. You don't need to use an aggregator in order to get access to the UK banks. A single library that's free for anyone to use can be used to interact with the top 9 banks in the UK. Now, if Brazil is successful with this program, that same very simple technology can be used to enable TPPs to get access to a very large number of customer bank accounts with consent. And that means that TPPs in Brazil should have an easier way to bring new propositions to market, a cheaper way to bring new propositions to market, which means that they can spend their money focusing on bringing business value to what it is that they are trying to achieve. Open banking is not about creating new plumbing. It's not about creating new middlemen and new card payment networks. Open banking is about creating and using well-defined standards and processes to enable individuals to get access to that data just by using open source APIs and libraries. You shouldn't need to be engaging as a TPP with an expensive middleware provider that's going to take 1% or 2% of your API, your costs, just to provide access to the banks. The whole point of this program is to give TPPs easy access to this data, and I will have failed if that is not realized.
Nice. And one thing that I'm noticing, talking to some banks, is that some banks they have to comply with the regulation only in phase 3, that is payments, and they are not preparing to do the phase 1, phase 2. That there is sharing the data from their customers. Are there many differences, especially in terms of security, from phase 2 for phase 3, for example? And do you think it's a good way just to comply with phase 3 and forget about the sharing of the data, the phase 2?
So the answer to your first question is no. There's not a huge difference from a security point of view. Everything is secure regardless of whether or not it is data or payments. And if you think about it, under the GDPR, or Brazilian's data protection legislation, it's actually more dangerous for a bank to lose customers' data than it is for payments to go wrong. Most payments are insured in one way or another, but customers' data, if lost, is very hard to make right. It's very hard to make whole, so it can be quite expensive if you end up implementing security poorly and leaking customers' data. So we treat, from a security point of view, data and payments have exactly the same security characteristics. So no, there is no difference between the security profile for data and the security profile for payments. For your second question is a very interesting one from a strategic point of view. Delivering a lot of open banking APIs can be quite a big project, and delivering one for payments or a few for payments actually might be a smaller cost burden. What will be interesting is to see how much the TPP community starts bringing new innovative open banking powered apps to the market, and how much consumer demand is going to drive banks' behaviors. For example, if there is a really great TPP app that needs open banking, well, and your bank doesn't provide that data, then customers will vote with their feet and go to a bank that does provide those services. So it will be interesting to see how much market forces compel banks that are not obliged under the regulation to open up access to customer data. It'll be interesting to see how many of them do so.
So what you're saying is that in terms of security, the infrastructure that the banks need to prepare, if they build all the infrastructure for the phase 3, they can use almost the same for the phase 2, right?
That's correct. There is no security or consent or anything really that's stopping them from delivering additional assets on that same platform. A payment API is no different from an accounts information API. It's secured in the same way, it's authorized in the same way, customers are authenticated in the same way.
Okay, great. And do you see any movements from the big techs to taking advantage of open banking to enter in this market. Here in Brazil, recently, WhatsApp are making payments now. Do you see this movement in UK and here in Brazil?
No, it's a good question. The answer in the UK is no. We haven't seen open banking enabled payments enter for any of the big tech players yet. We haven't seen any of the big tech players use open banking data either yet. I mean, most of the big tech want you to be using their payment rails and their payment systems and their payment or data ecosystems, not necessarily engaging with other providers and looking outbound. So no, not yet. But do I think it will happen? Yes. Yeah, yes, I do.
Great. Okay, Alf. I think we are reaching the time here. But do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing I'd say is to anyone that's watching this is that this is an exciting time for Brazil finance and Brazilians collectively as a nation. And the success and outcome of this program will depend on the willingness and drive from a lot of individuals, companies, big, small, and regulators. This really is your program, your system, and your opportunity to make open banking Brazil what it is that you want it to be, and it could power the Brazilian economy for the next 10, 20 years. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and I hope everyone treats it as such and gives it the best shot.
Great. Thank you very much, Alf. Yeah, I agree. I think that open banking will change the scenario here in Brazil, and many new services and new products will be created after open banking. So that was a great conversation, very informative. Thank you very much, Alf. Thank you everybody for watching, and please feel free to contact me. It will be a pleasure to talk to you about open banking or any other matter related to payments. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.